Is this thing on? Hi guys, my name is Abby and this is the Just Flip It podcast. On this week's roundup, I'm first of all going to start with an article I've seen from the BBC. All the topics I'm going to discuss have all come from the BBC. So the first one is about a 24-year-old entrepreneur called Darren Tekorang, and he is the entrepreneur, the brains behind a mobile barber shop. So by mobile, I mean that you can get your trim, your cuts done from his van, and it's called Trim It. So this article grabbed my attention because he's tapped into something that a lot of millennials or 20-somethings are doing right now, or something that's very hot and it's very trendy, and that is the use of apps, the use of technology in order to generate business and wealth for yourself. He is an adopter, from what I can tell, of Warren Buffett's saying about own nothing, control everything. The way he has done that is by having a mobile app rather than actually paying rent for a shop. So the article focuses on his background, how he started up, touches upon his dyslexia, his love for traditional barbershops that you could spend hours on end with the other men, his father, just lamenting tales about what's happened that week. But he says that the downside of this is that as he's grown older, he doesn't have 3, 4, 5, 6 hours to spend in the barbershop just gossiping. He needs to spend 1 hour max and go home or go and do what he needs to do. So he identified there is a problem and there is a way that he can fix that problem. He also works with a gentleman called Nana Darko on this and has 2 full-time barbers. The way he went about creating this idea is by entering a competition for startups and being successful. He initially launched his business as just a mobile app where people can book for a salon or a barber. But what happened was that meant relying on people who may not be as reliable. So he found that he was getting lots of complaints and bad reviews. The money started drying up, so then he and his business partner had to go back to the drawing board to think about ways that they can make a success of what they've started. And rather than it just being a side hustle, it now became their main focus. I like this article because he is so young and, as I've said, he's identified a need and he seems to be doing very, very well. So I say, good luck. So from one 20-something entrepreneur to the next. And by that I mean Mr. Sean Jay-Z Carter, who started off in his mid-20s, but now Forbes have deemed him to be the first billionaire rapper. Now let's take that in, the first billionaire rapper. So he's outperformed the likes of Dr. Dre, P. Diddy. I mean, those men, hats off to them. They are inspirational and they've done fantastically in their career. But what has made it so that Jay-Z has gone one step above them? And it's not solely down to his rap career, more like the innovation, the mindset, identifying potential opportunities, trends, and building upon them. I first want to speak about how he's done this. So BBC reports that his assets include a $75 million music catalogue, stakes in a champagne and cognac brand. I'm not going to pronounce the names, but one begins with Armand and the other one is Ducy, which collectively is worth 410 million. Stake in Uber, which is 70 million. Property in fashionable parts of New York and Los Angeles. We all know that he's a New York native, but moved to Los Angeles for his family. A 100 million stake in music streaming service Tidal, which we all know he launched a few years ago, and his art collection, which is worth 50 million. Not to mention he has the beautiful, gorgeous wife, Beyonce Giselle Knowles Carter, who's worth about 335 million. Some people say 400 million. We'll round it up to 400 million because we like Queen Bee. So all in all, as I've just described, it wasn't solely through his music. Whilst music played an important factor, it was the vessel that enabled him to get into these spaces, network with these people, and spot these opportunities to be the mogul that he is today. When I first heard about it a few days ago, a smile came over my face and I was so happy. I thought, wow, this is true inspiration. And you can see his picture on the Flip Girl Instagram page. The last thing I'm going to speak about is, and I can't believe I'm saying this, however, Woolworths springs to mind, is Topshop and its steady decline. So it seems we, the British people, have fallen out of love with Topshop. the well-known and probably one of the biggest high street brands. I remember a time when I was growing up, maybe in secondary school, when people used to aspire to own Topshop clothing. It was always something that was put on a pedestal with the likes of like Jane Norman, if anyone remembers that. So to read this article, the first thing I thought to myself is, what happened? What went wrong? I mean, on previous pods, I've spoken about the decline of the high street, but I always thought that such a big giant such as Topshop or Arcadia, which is the group that owns Topshop, would have bucked this trend because they have such a big hold over the retail market. However, people are now starting to move away from the likes of your Topshops, your Burtons, your Dorothy Perkins, and focus on shops such as Zara or H&M and even ASOS, I mean, which dominates the online market. I know you've got things such as Boohoo and Pretty Little Thing and what's this the other, Misguided, I want to say? Yeah, Misguided. um, these websites and these brands have catwalk videos and models with a range of clothing that are a range of sizes, showing you how the clothes fit as you walk. So adding to that user experience, whereas Topshop didn't really have that. Their website is a bit dated. If you go into the shops, they're a bit dated. I don't know. I mean, I can't remember the last time I'd actually shopped in Topshop, to be fair. Maybe I'm one of the contributors to their downfall, but I always thought that for some reason they bucked the trend. It also doesn't help that there's this ongoing sexual harassment scandal with the boss. I mean, we don't know the effects of that yet, but that can't be good for business, especially in this Me Too era. So, with all that being said, what does that mean for the remaining retailers on the high street? Please stay tuned for the next part of the pod. On this part of the pod, I'm actually going to call it Facebook Chronicles. And by that I mean I belong to a number of groups on Facebook which focus primarily on property. And these are fantastic tools for people who are starting out or who are actually quite experienced because people ask questions, people give responses. It's a place where you can really come together and find out the latest things that are happening in and around the different parts of the UK and even globally. But as I said, this podcast mainly focuses on what's happening in the UK. Actually, there was one group that I was part of, and I got into quite a heated debate with someone about extending leases. And that is what I'm going to talk about today, leasehold and freehold. So I'm going to talk about the difference between, and hopefully by listening to this, you can understand what works best for you in your current situation. So let me start off with a freehold. A freehold is when you own a building or the house and the land that it sits on outright in perpetuity. So in this context, perpetuity means forever. Whereas with a leasehold, this is where you own the property, but the land which the property is built on is owned by a freeholder. So in essence, you do and you don't own it. You own the property, but you don't own the land that it sits on. So there are a number of debates that always go on, or I always hear about which one is better. And as I mentioned earlier on, it just depends on your situation. So I'm just going to list the pros and cons of each. If I'm going to start with freehold, I will say the pros for freehold are that you have full ownership of the property and the land. You don't need to worry about the lease running out, and there's no need to pay a ground rent, service charge, or any other landlord charges. The cons, however, is that it's a higher investment. That's why typically most houses are freeholds. There's high stamp duty and interest costs, and there is likely to be more maintenance costs. Whereas leaseholds, which are typically flats, the pros for this are the cost to maintain the building are shared. So if you're in a block and the maintenance cost comes up to £10,000 and you have 10 flats in the block, each of you pay £1,000. Lower barriers to entry in terms of the housing ladder, number two. So as I mentioned, freeholds tend to typically houses and people are struggling to get on the housing ladder, especially in London. So leaseholders and flats, they're easier, not that they're easy, easier to buy. And traditionally, they provide higher cash on cash returns and yields. The cons, however, are that you get higher ground rents and service charges. If the lease is anything less than 80 years, it's harder to obtain a mortgage, and they tend to be smaller spaces. So I just want to come back to the whole higher ground rent and service charges, and this equates to the maintenance, overall maintenance of the building. So as I said, you've got higher maintenance costs with a freeholder, but it's likely to be shared with a leasehold if you've got a block of leasehold flats. As I mentioned, and I mention it again, it all just depends on where you are in your journey, whether you're at the start or if there are issues with the family. And by issues, I mean if your family's small, if your family's big, what you're able to put up with and what you can afford, essentially. Thank you for listening to the Just Flip It podcast. If you have any questions on what I've spoken about in terms of the freehold and leasehold, even if you want to know what I was getting into a heated debate with someone about, please message me or email me on flipitpod@gmail.com. Please rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast. I am on Spotify, SoundCloud, iTunes, in addition to the website that I put on my Instagram and Facebook. So please, just get in touch. Thank you and stay tuned for the next episode.